overview for identity management. What is identity management? Why is it important? Well, the definition of identity management, it's oftentimes abbreviated to identity and access management, or IAM, or just IDM is identity management. It is basically a process of finding or defining digital identities and then managing permissions to those identities after a verification process has taken place. This will make a little bit more sense in a moment, but that's the overall idea of what identity management is. We utilize identity management a lot of different ways. For instance, we can utilize it to connect to web resources like websites and web applications. We can use it to log into client desktops and laptops and things like that that are joined to a domain, to manage the amount of people and who we let onto our networks and how do we verify that they are who they say they are. This is all falling under the identity management umbrella. Now, where the access management comes in is after we've identified somebody successfully, we can actually assign permissions to what they're supposed to be able to do on our network if they were allowed into our network in the first place. So what's the importance of this? The importance of identity management plays a pretty significant role for safeguarding our data. In cybersecurity, one of the largest things that we're concerned with all the time is our is the data and data protection. There's so many different facets of data protection in IT and cybersecurity. It kind of encompasses a very large portion of cybersecurity in general. So the importance of data is obviously very crucial. It's part of what we know as the CIA triad, which is the confidentiality portion of the CIA triad. This means that we have to keep confidential information confidential. We have to protect the integrity. We can only do this and protect the integrity of a system by managing who is able to access that system. So these are both what identity management basically is and how it is important in today's class. So let's talk about some of the case studies moving forward. One of the most important case studies that happened recently was Microsoft Corporation. They actually had a lot of problems cropping up with Microsoft Active Directory. It was really the only way to do things about 10 years ago or something like that. It was the leading cutting edge. It was the best management system out there for large enterprise networks. So basically everything used it. So Microsoft Corporation eventually went to the cloud about 10 years ago at this point. It's actually been around longer, but really seriously about 10 years now. They started to leverage things like Entra ID, or what it used to be called Azure Active Directory. And it allowed us to start enabling things like multi-factor authentication, role-based access control, and start streamlining some of the user onboarding. So we could actually just, if they had a Microsoft account, for instance, this is a nice thing about Entra ID or Entra, is if you already have a Microsoft account or an email account, you can actually just invite somebody via whatever email they provide, and you can create them a temporary account to have access to whatever resources they want in the environment. This is a way to very quickly onboard people, even if they're just contractors and things like that, working for your company. You can just invite them, they can accept, and then you can assign them roles, and they just log into your system with their email and a password that was set, or some kind of multi-factor authentication that you set. So this is a very big deal as far as identity management went for that exact reason. Now, there are some regulatory frameworks, and we'll talk about that again, that are kind of included in that. And two of the most important ones I'll just talk about one of them just for the sake of time. We have something known as GDPR. We talked slightly about this before, but Microsoft, in the implementation of things like Azure or Entra ID, kind of allowed us to come into compliance with GDPR. Now, GDPR is actually a European regulatory framework. It's not a United States or any other country framework. Now, some people adopted very similar things and usages, but GDPR is primarily European Union, right? What it basically means is if I went to a website and I accessed that website, let's say, it asked me for certain information from me. It asked me for my first name, last name, credit card details, perhaps, I don't know. You could just say like birth date is a good example of that. and things like that. So it asks you for some information that identifies you. We could even call this PII. This information could then be, and this is what happens in the United States a lot, depending on the state you live in, this information can get sold to other organizations that have nothing to do with the original organization that you were doing business with. So all this information will then be stored on their databases, making it more dangerous, because the more copies of your information that there are, the more dangerous this becomes to keep it private, right? This is why identity theft is kind of rampant. So GDPR basically is a framework that basically does not allow people to do this. It has to ask, in another analogy, it works good. Now, I might give somebody, if I'm playing with them with a toy of some kind, I can give them a toy and I can say, this is what you're allowed to do with this toy. You're allowed to play with it. You're allowed to go outside with it. You're allowed to come inside with it. You're allowed to do whatever. But I have to strictly define what you're allowed to do with that toy. And only you're allowed to do what I've strictly defined for. So GDPR works a lot of the similar way with information or personal information, that I can tell you if you're allowed to sell it. I can tell you if you're allowed to share it with people, but you're only allowed to share certain types of information, and you're only allowed to share it with certain types of organizations. This stuff is all defined with GDPR. Now, this kind of happens behind the scenes when you do user agreements and services, but either way, they're not allowed to sell your information to anybody that they want to make a lot of money. This is kind of something that they're very limited to under GDPR. So protecting your information and making sure that it's not being transmitted or even accessible to other organizations is like kind of a central point of that. So the granularity of Microsoft Corporation's introduction of Entra ID and other technologies like that kind of enabled them to be a lot closer compliance with GDPR, because they're a multinational organization. So this is something that was a really big boost to their organization. That was good.